Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for this great honor and for this wonderful welcome. I want to thank the rector, Dr. Garrel, the Secretary General, Dr. Berga, the President of the Foundation, Dr. Pierre, and of course, I'm completely surprised and delighted by the very personal and meaningful tribute from Dr. Galifa, the Dean of Psychology, Education, and Sports Sciences. I've had a wonderful trip here to Spain with my daughter, first in Madrid, and then for the last few days in Barcelona, where I went to the Col·legi Montserrat, where I've been a number of times and met with colleagues there who are friends, and also have had the chance in the last few days to learn something about the Ramon Llull University, its diverse faculties, its many enterprises, and I hope we will have contact in the future. As you know, the ceremony of an honorary degree is very ritualistic, and I respect rituals, but I decided that I was going to depart from rituals, depart from custom today, and I owe you an explanation. When universities were first begun in Europe almost 1,000 years ago, people would come from all over to hear the lecturer because there was no other way to know what he, and they were all he's then, thought. Maybe that's what happened to Ramon Llull. I wasn't there at the time. And then printing developed, and you didn't have to go to the lecture if you could read the book. And now we live at a time where information is available at the touch of a finger. And anything that I could have spoken about here of my work, you can get online or at my 3 websites or at YouTube. And of course, you also have a program with the speech I was going to give. In many ways, I'm not very American. I'll explain that a bit. But I am American in the sense that I don't feel it's fair to make you sit here for a half an hour and hear what you can read on your own time. So I'm going to speak more extemporaneously, and I apologize in advance to those of you who wanted to read every word by word next time, not this time. So I didn't know that Dean Galifa was going to talk about my life. So that's a coincidence, because I'm going to talk about my life also. But I have one advantage over him. I lived my life. But our stories are not that different from one another. I'm going to speak in terms of 4 acts, as in a play. Each act has a transformation or crisis or turning point between the act and the next act. And in the end, I will have a coda or conclusion, an epilogue to the play. So Act 1 was when I was young. As he mentioned, my family were immigrants from Germany, Jewish immigrants who arrived in the United States on Crystal Night, the night of the broken glass, November 9th and 10th, 1938. So they made it just in time. I grew up in a small city named Scranton in Pennsylvania. My youth was fine, but it wasn't very intellectually stimulating. But then I was fortunate enough to be admitted to Harvard College 55 years ago, and I have stayed there ever since. I became attracted to the social sciences. I studied sociology and anthropology and psychology, and you may know some of my teachers. My tutor was the psychoanalyst Erik Erikson, famous for life stages. My first supervisor in work was Nelson Goodman, a major philosopher who started Project Zero. And the person whom I learned the most from, both in terms of psychology, but also in terms of working in organizations, was Jerome Bruner, who those of you in education probably know. And I'm happy to say that I just went to his 100th birthday party. He is still with us. And I got my degree in this combined field of sociology, anthropology, and psychology, but I was trained mostly to do experimental psychology. And for many years I did experiments the way other psychologists do. But what was unusual is I worked with two different populations. With children, normal children, gifted children, sometimes children with intellectual deficits. And I also worked with brain damage patients, people who'd had a stroke or trauma or tumor. And every day I would see unpredictable cognitive profiles. A child who was very good at chess but couldn't learn foreign languages, or a child who was very musical but couldn't find her way home. And of course, as you know, with brain damage, the single most important fact is whether the damage is on the left or the right, superficial or deep, anterior or posterior. And so every day I would meet patients with very unpredictable profiles. As it happened, I was a student with Antonio Damasio, whom I just learned received an honorary degree here some years ago. These experiences with children and with brain damage patients caused a change, a transformation in me, because the idea that I had grown up with, like most people, and that I felt comfortable with because I was good at intelligence tests, was that the idea of intellect as being singular didn't make sense. Because if there was just one intelligence, you'd be either good in everything, or average in everything, or below average in everything, and I was seeing exceptions every day. And that's what led me, over a number of years, to develop the theory of multiple intelligences, MI theory. And that's the second act of the 4 acts, was developing the theory. It took about 5 years. And the reason it took 5 years is not because I'm slow,
realment lent, sinó perquè realment vaig haver de desenvolupar una sèrie de criteris, de definir criteris de disciplines diferents, psicologia, antropologia, genètica, i història, cultura, etc., per intentar esbrinar quina era la millor manera de poder descriure les diferents intel·ligències. I crec que la meva llista ha sobreviscut força bé al pas del temps. Ara sabem molt més sobre el cervell del que seríem fa 30 o 40 anys, però tot i així penso que aquesta llista encara segueix tenint sentit. I com el doctor Callifa ha dit, als psicòlegs mai els hi va agradar especialment la meva teoria. Podríem parlar-ne llargament sobre per què, però en l'àmbit de l'educació, als Estats Units i primer i després en molts altres països, sí que va despertar molt interès aquesta teoria de les intel·ligències múltiples, així que vaig passar de treballar bàsicament com a psicòleg a començar a treballar més com a educador, especialista en educació i sobretot treballar amb l'educació fins a secundària i vaig a començar a establir relacions amb escoles i fa 30 anys per primera vegada vaig anar a la Reggio Emilia, una comunitat fantàstica, de fet una província on havien posat en marxa escoles fantàstiques instituts i abans de conèixer-me ja tenien la frase mira, nens de 100 llengües, o sigui que encara estaven més avançat que la meva teoria de les múltiples intel·ligències i fa uns anys també vaig demanar d'establir una relació amb el Col·legi Montserrat i vam fer una sèrie de visites durant una sèrie d'anys. I em sentia molt bé sobre la teoria de les intel·ligències múltiples perquè vaig fer uns viatges fantàstics a llocs on la gent sí que tenia ganes de sentir-ne parlar, però ara fa uns 20 anys, una mica més de 20 anys, vaig experimentar una crisi personal, una transformació personal. Va ser com una trucada, per despertar, perquè un col·lega d'Austràlia em va explicar com s'estaven utilitzant les idees a Austràlia, em va dir, i no t'agradarà com les estan utilitzant, i li vaig dir, bueno, doncs envia'm proves, i em va enviar un paquet de papers, això abans que ho poguessis fer, enviats junts per internet. I tenia raó, com més llegia, menys m'agradava el que havien fet, i tot i que estic segur que ho feien amb molt bona intenció, el que van fer va ser, van llistar tots els grups de diferents ètnies i per qüestions de raça quines intel·ligències tenien i quines no.
Based on their theory of intelligence. And this had never happened before to me, because I had to decide what to do. Now, many of you are scholars, and most scholars, including me, we're very happy if anybody notices what we say and do. Most scholarship gets buried in obscurity. I was lucky enough that people were paying attention, but I'd never contemplated what you should do when your ideas are being abused, misused. And so I had a bit of a personal crisis. And I went on television in Australia and I said, this has no evidence and people should not do it. And this led, over the next 2 years, to a study of what it means to be a worker, what it means to be a professional, and what responsibilities we have if we are doctor or lawyer or professor or engineer or accountant. What are the responsibilities of the professional? And I began a project with Professor Csikszentmihalyi, who was mentioned, and with William Damon, another psychologist. And we initially called it the Good Work Project, but now we just call it the Good Project. And the idea was to understand what it means to be a good person, a good worker, a good citizen. Now, of course, one could simply answer this on an a priori basis, or simply by reflecting on it, and I'm sure that many great philosophers have had their own answers for good, but we are empiricists, we like to do research, so over a 10-year period, we interviewed over 1,200 people in 9 professions, from law and medicine to pre-collegiate education to college education. Actually, we got the most support, the most financial support to study the profession of philanthropy. So that wasn't our expectations, but philanthropists wanted to understand what it meant to do good work in philanthropy. And as a result of this big study, it took 10 years, we developed 2 concepts. One is that good work is the intersection of excellence, engagement, and ethics. The good worker knows what he or she is doing. They're excellent in expertise. They're engaged, they care, they love their work, they want to do more of it. They look forward to Monday, beginning of the week. And the good worker is ethical. When there's a difficult problem, the good worker thinks a lot about what to do, talks to other people, reflects. You don't always get it right, but if you don't get it right, you try to do better the next time. So we call these the 3 E's, and we have an image called the Triple Helix. If I had a slide, I would show it to you. And we use the word DNA for the double helix of genetics, but the triple helix of work is excellence, ethics, and engagement, and you need all 3 of those strands if you want to be a good worker. And it turns out that the same analysis applies to citizenship. The good citizen knows the rules and laws, cares, votes, speaks up, debates, writes letters, goes on social media, and tries to do the right thing, not just what's good for you, but what's good for the broader public. So the 3 E's were one important finding. The second important finding is it's much easier to do good work if all the forces in the society are aligned, if they all want to do the same thing in the same way. And to make that clear, we studied journalism and genetics, and this was about 20 years ago. Genetics was a very well-aligned field. There was a lot of support for it. Everybody wanted the geneticists to help us live longer and be healthier. It was well-aligned, so it was pretty easy to do good work 20 years ago. 20 years ago was already very difficult to do journalism because the public wanted one thing, the editors wanted a second thing, the publishers wanted a third thing, the marketplace wanted a fourth thing, the reporters wanted a fifth thing. It was a mess. And as you probably know, it's even more of a mess now because of social media and the 24/7 news cycle and so on. So we did the Good Work Project, and then, you may have seen it on the website, we do good work, good play, good citizenship, good collaboration. We call it the Goods, and we changed the name from the Good Work Project to the Good Project. And we've developed a lot of materials to help people go down the good path. But again, there was a crisis, a turning point, because we studied over 100 young people in America, young people with many opportunities, and what they told us was, we like good work, we want to be good workers, but we can't be good workers when we're young, because if we're ethical, if we're moral, and other people aren't, and they get the prize first, they get the honor first, then we will lose to them. And so someday we'll be good workers, but for now we should just be left alone. And we were talking about this yesterday. I like to quote St. Augustine of Hippo, who said, "O Lord, make me chaste, make me pure, but not yet." And, and that's what these young people were telling us. And so this led to the fourth act, which I'm now very much in the middle of, and that's trying to understand higher education, universities, colleges in the United States. And we focus there because we need to help people become good workers and good citizens before they enter the general world, and while we still have a chance to have influence on them. And of course, those of you who are faculty here have that same opportunity. And we approach this in many ways. We have sessions with young people where we debate ethical issues. For example, what happens if you have a wonderful teacher, but the teacher is a very hard grader? So the teacher doesn't give high grades, and then the students don't win various awards and prizes. What should the teacher do? What should the students do? Or we ask the students to take a list of 30 values, like honesty and success and fame and responsibility, and they have to list the 6 things they value the most and the 6 that are the least important. And then on another week, we ask the students to make a pie chart of how they spend the week. How much time study, how much time with friends, how much time with sports, how much time eating, how much time sleeping, and how much time on Facebook. Of course, Facebook always wins. But then we ask the students to juxtapose their values to how they spend their time. And this is a shock, because there's almost always no connection between what they value and how they spend their time. So we've been doing this for a number of years, but then 3 years ago, my colleagues and I decided to do a very big study, the biggest study I've ever undertaken. It's called Liberal Arts and Sciences in the 21st Century. We're studying 10 colleges and universities in America. Some of them you would know, some of them you wouldn't know. They're very, very diverse: California, Middle West, South, North. And in each campus, we conduct 200 interviews with incoming students, graduating students, faculty, administrators, trustees, alums, alumni, that's people who graduated, parents, and also recruiters, job recruiters. And very much like in the Good Work Project, we try to see when these people are aligned, when they agree, and when they disagree, when they're misaligned. And when they're misaligned, that's when we begin to figure out how to bring better alignment so that they're more in agreement about higher education. Now you might say, well, why should we study higher education in America? And let me just give you a few sentences about that. The 4-year liberal arts education in America is admired throughout the world. People from East Asia, China, Japan, Korea, from Latin America, from Europe, they all want to send their students to Stanford or Yale or Amherst College. So it's a very successful system, but it's in huge trouble because it's way too expensive. $60,000 a year, that's a lot of money, that's 50,000 euros. And the population is what I call hyper-vocational. Everybody's interested just in getting jobs, and that's very different from a liberal arts education where you read widely, you study many different subjects, you don't have to commit to a vocation when you begin higher education. And there's a lot of pathology on campus. There's a lot of cheating, a lot of sexual harassment, a lot of drinking and drugs. So once again, we could have just sat in our study and said, well, here's what should be done, but instead we're doing these interviews. We've done about 750. I've read every one of them, and I've done about 150 interviews myself. So this is what's keeping me busy these days. And of course, I can't discuss the results yet, but I can tell you a concept that we've been developing, and that concept we call liberal arts capital. Many of you will know the work of Pierre Bourdieu, the French sociologist, and he talks about different kinds of capital: financial capital, social capital, cultural capital. We think in order to benefit from a higher education, you need to have liberal arts and sciences capital, LAS, liberal arts and sciences capital. You need to know that there's a lot to learn in many different subjects. You should be willing to study something you don't already know about, willing to study something which won't give you a career, willingness to speak up, to form an opinion, but also to have that opinion changed by somebody else who has a better argument or more evidence. So we call this Liberal Arts and Sciences Capital, and one reason I like that title is because liberal arts and sciences is LAS, and so we can write a book called Las Capital, which is a pun both on Karl Marx's Das Kapital, but also it refers to Thomas Piketty's work, which many of you will know about the capital and investment and employment today. So that is how I'm spending my time nowadays. But I told you that there's another act. It's a final act. It's a coda. It's a epilogue. I'm over the biblical age. Abraham was 120, but I don't believe he really reached 120. The biblical age is 70, and I'm older than 70. I don't know how much time I have left. Nobody knows how much time they have left, but the students have more time left than the people in the front row. But I've been very fortunate in every way. Lucky that my family escaped, lucky to be raised by a good family, fortunate to have had a good education, fortunate to have honors like the ones you bestowed upon me. I also have 4 children, generations, and now 4 grandchildren. And so when I'm gone, they will still be here. And I've had students and colleagues, as Joseph said. One thing I've done is work with many, many different people. And when I'm gone, there'll still be some books, there'll still be some blogs, but what I hope is that I will be forgiven for whatever bad I've done, whatever sins I've committed. I hope that people will forget whatever I said that was wrong, but I hope that they will preserve and transmit the things I've involved in which are good, and that's why I'm spending my time now trying to understand and to spread the good. With that, I thank you again and appreciate your attention.